Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today I'm going to be talking about Dungeons & Dragons. Its 19th year of history, 1992, okay? So this is Dungeons & Dragons, almost finishing out its second decade of existence, and specifically today we are talking about its history in 1992 through the filter of clear. Catalyst, location, entity, artifact, and relationship. So who was the catalyst for Dungeons & Dragons in 1992? Well, the catalyst for Dungeons & Dragons in 1992 was a gentleman by the name of Mike Pondsmith. And in 1992, he has a tabletop role-playing game, a freestanding, brand new core rule book for a brand new tabletop role-playing game called Dream Park. Now, Dream Park today is a sleeper. Not a lot of people have read it or own it. It's not talked a lot about in circles. It's absolutely one of my favorite, absolute favorite role-playing games. It's on my shelf, in its actual physical form, and I'm just super proud to own the book. It's a really, really super unusual book. All right, so Dream Park is really cool because essentially what you do is the player characters play as people who have gone to an incredibly high-tech amusement park. And so essentially you're playing a player character who is a player character in a world that has been constructed for them, exactly like Westworld. Okay? So now, unlike Westworld, not everything is animatronic. There are some actual real people who are creating this world for you. But the super cool thing about Dream Park is you could play, 1 week you could play a fantasy game where your player characters are in a fantasy world, and then the next week your same player character is in a science fiction setting. And then the next week they're in a Western setting. And then the next week they might be in feudal Japan. And then the next week they might be in, a gritty cop show, right? So Dream Park was a story within a story. It was a frame story, right? Incredibly innovative, really wonderful, based on a novel, right? But one of the things that's really cool is it has beautiful art. It's illustrated like a comic book. And in the book itself, Mike Pondsmith is actually drawn in the book, okay? Now, why is Mike Pondsmith serving as a catalyst for Dungeons & Dragons in 1992? Well, the reason why is Mike Pondsmith was a few different things. First and foremost, he was absolutely a brilliant game designer. So he designed this amazing tabletop role-playing game, Dream Park. He would design Cyberpunk 2020. He would design Castle Falkenstein, one of the most unique tabletop role-playing games ever. And he would design some mecha games as well. To this day, his impact on the industry overall is still continuing. His son had just finished the Witcher tabletop role-playing game, right? So there's a long history of Mike Pondsmith's impact on the tabletop role-playing game scene. But the second thing that's important about him is he was a black gentleman. So he was African American, and he was a very competent, highly skilled, and capable tabletop role-playing game designer. That shouldn't be an unusual thing, but in 1992, it is an unusual thing. So basically, one of the things that Dungeons & Dragons was kind of born from a bunch of white guys, and throughout its entire history, there would be other sources pointing back to it saying, Dungeons & Dragons needs more diversity in its design. Dungeons & Dragons need more diversity in its dungeon masters. Dungeons & Dragons needs more diversity in its players. Dungeons & Dragons needs more diversity in the people who are depicted in the book, in the tabletop, in the PHB, the DMG, and the MM. It needs more diversity in how those people are portrayed. It needs more diversity in how those people are, what they're doing, right? And Mike Pondsmith, one of the greatest things about Mike Pondsmith is Mike Pondsmith doesn't say any of those with words. He's saying, hey, minority designers are an incredibly good thing for the hobby and for the industry. And so Mike Pondsmith is one of the greatest tabletop role-playing game designers, regardless of any other attribute about him. But he is pointing the way for diversity for the industry overall, and that will that will bring forward seeds that will bring fruit, right? His work will bring fruit, and today we have people like Louis Porter Jr., who's done a tremendous job with Neo Exodus and has been one of the top third-party designers for Pathfinder, and there are other people as well. But I'm a huge fan of Mike Pondsmith for two reasons: really for the work he did in creating amazing tabletop role-playing games. I'm really excited to have his books on my shelf, and I'm also really excited about I really feel that his work early on just showed the entire world minority design is important, and it's important that companies embrace it. And so he was a catalyst for Dungeons & Dragons. He was challenging Dungeons & Dragons to bring more diversity to its design, right? From the very, very beginning, right? All right, what was the location for in 1992? Well, the location for 1992 was Black Hills, South Dakota. Now, the Black Hills of South Dakota are known to this very day as one of the best places in America to hike, right? And so for 19 years, Dungeons & Dragons has been here, and it has served as a powerful area for exploration in fantasy worlds for literally low millions of players. And actually in 1992, the number of players may have been in the double digits all over through the world, well over 10 million. We had 9 million people playing Dungeons & Dragons in 2018, and also it's important to understand that that there was a dip, right? So we're right now returning to, as far as numbers of players, we're returning to some of the heyday numbers, which in 1992, this was some of the top years for the game as far as it being played, right? All right, now you have all these players playing in these fantasy worlds and doing tons of exploration in the fantasy world. But at this point, the game is no longer new. It is almost 2 decades old, and many of the players who have been in no less than 10 or 20 different forests in fantasy worlds maybe have never been in a forest in real life for more than 5 minutes. And so now you see the community of Dungeons & Dragons actually saying, okay, in the game, we have combat, we have exploration, and we have interaction, right? Now, it wasn't talked about that way in 1992. All those things were in the game, and I think people subconsciously recognized that was the breakdown of the game. But you also see people starting to say, oh, in this game I use a sword. Well, guess what? I'm going to go over to the Society for Creative Anachronism and actually learn how to use a sword. But then, also, you have many people saying, my character walked 10, 12 miles in the game last week. Maybe this week I go out and I walk 5 miles in the forest and I do some hiking, right? And so especially players who are living in places like Utah, places like near the Black Hills of South Dakota, are saying, some of the things I'm doing in the game I'm going to do in real life. And so they're taking up exploration in IRL, which in the real world, in real life. So that's really exciting. And then the Black Hills of South Dakota represents exploration, which is a big part of the game. All right. So who is our entity in 1992? Well, our entity in 1992 is Bill Clinton, the brand new president of the United States of America, which is a huge change for America. So America has come off of two terms of service for Ronald Reagan, and then his vice president, George H. Bush. So now you have over a decade of conservative rule within the United States of America, and the nation reverses that and elects a Democrat. And so Bill Clinton comes in and begins to take the country in a new direction, and really starts to change fundamentally how the government interacts with people, and also changes forever the nature of the presidency and what the presidency means, and who holds the presidency and how that looks, right? So Bill Clinton is a huge figure within American history, and he's a huge figure within Dungeons & Dragons history, because he is reshaping the world that all the Dungeon Masters are playing in, all the designers are designing in, and all the players are actually, the Dungeon Masters are creating, and the players are actually playing in. So Bill Clinton is a big big entity within 1992. What is the artifact for 1992? Well, the artifact for 1992 is the Mazda Miata, right? So the Mazda Miata was very, very super hot car at the time. It was very popular. It was really stylish. It really, it also, so people were really excited about Japanese cars. The Mazda Miata was one of the most stylish, most zippy little fun supercars it took America by storm. It did very, very well here. It's recognizable even today. It's become very much a collector's item today. But in 1992, the Mazda Miata is a really exciting car. They can't keep them in the showrooms. They're selling out very quickly. And it was really just you're seeing a change in American society, right? So a lot of Americans are saying, I don't need to buy American to show support for our nation. Our nation is doing so well that we can take a discount and buy a car from another country, right? So there's, you see nationalism starting to revert a bit. People are saying, I can buy a car from anywhere in the world. It's not necessary that every single car that I buy comes from this nation, because this nation is doing just fine, right? And also people just wanting a different type of vehicle, right? That's another one. The Mazda Miata was a small vehicle. You really couldn't get 4 people into it. It was like a 2-seater, really nice, zippy 2-seater car. I think it might have had like a back seat, but you really could not comfortably fit 4 people into a Mazda Miata, right? And so it was not a 4-person vehicle. And so you see Americans also turning their back on large, lumbering vehicles, right? And saying, we can have different, right? And we can have different types of vehicles in mass in this nation. So the Mazda Miata is a really important artifact for 1992. And again, all this is, shaping the world that the designers, the DMs, and the players are in, right? What is the relationship for 1992? The relationship for 1992 is conceptual modeling, right? So one of the things that is super exciting about Dungeons & Dragons at this time is you have many games which are, I have a fighter, I have a rogue, I have a wizard, I have a cleric. We go into the dungeon and we slay a bunch of goblins, and then I turn some skeletons, right? And very, very traditional fantasy general storytelling, right? That's absolutely happening. But there are some people, right? And I played in one of these games, so even back then, right? So and at this point, I'm in college. And I played in a game where we're in a traditional fantasy setting. And our player characters were bringing treasure back to the king and queen. And we would sell the king and queen different types of treasure, right? Well, the king had died about 6 months ago, and then the queen of the nation dies as well, right? So we go back and we're expecting to deal with the queen. And when we come back, there is no queen, and there's merchants are in the courtroom, right? And we're like, hey, where's the royal family, right? And they're like, well, here's the problem. The king and the queen didn't really have any kids. So we as the merchants of the nation are taking care of this situation. And right now we have this big investigation to find the children of the king, right? And so you're like, oh, children of the king, okay. A son or a daughter of the king. Well, actually, and then everybody in court's like, well, there are no kids, right? And then someone said, well, there's been some talk that maybe there is a son or a daughter, right? So now there's this question of the king maybe have had children with women who weren't his wife. Do they have a claim to the throne, so forth, right? So we go out, we get more treasure, and we bring it back, right? And we sold the first treasure to the merchants, right? So we come back 2 months later, and the merchants are still in charge. And the merchants are now saying that they have this ongoing investigation looking for children of the king and who's the rightful heir. And there's this investigation of, well, maybe the king's brother, but the king's brother is missing. And what we realize is that the merchants are now running the nation, right? And so we asked the GM, and we said, we're going to do some investigation here. And we find out that the merchants, not only are they running the nation, but they have fights between themselves on what should happen in the nation. They're also actually, the merchants are actually essentially giving like UBI, Universal Basic Income. They are really funding the wellness of the nation because the reality is they're actually running the country, right? And they're comfortable with trading some of their money for this power. And the merchants are now talking about, well, what if there really is never what if a king or a queen is never put back on the throne, and we just rule this country by goodwill and good decisions, right? And when the merchants can't decide amongst themselves, we find all this out through investigation. Well, if the merchants can't decide by themselves, what to do, how to rule, what they do then is they actually vote, right? So you have this group of powerful men and women voting on what should happen in the nation, right? And so, with that said, you're like in a situation where so we're like, is this nobility turning into a representative democracy in some ways, or something looking like a democracy, or rule by vote, and we're like, this is really strange, right? But what the Dungeon Master was doing was conceptual modeling, right? And it's conceptual modeling of political systems within Dungeons and Dragons, and within our own. At this time I'm in Millersville University, and there are multiple games going on of Dungeons and Dragons with equally strange topics being discussed, right? And people doing conceptual modeling within Dungeons and Dragons. Really, really fascinating interactive work being done with Dungeons and Dragons. Really fascinating material. So Dungeons and Dragons has a relationship with conceptual modeling. It did in 1992, and it still does today. So that is a J. Scott Garibay clear history of the 19th year of Dungeons & Dragons history, 1992. I would love to hear your thoughts on 1992's history of Dungeons & Dragons. Please put them in the comments below. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful day.